name is Dr. Michelle Gamble. Today I have the beautiful pleasure of sharing with you something that is extremely passionate to my heart. I know everyone in this country has been rocked to our core with the recent events that we have undergone as a nation with the Supreme Court Justice hearings and listening to the testimony of an extremely brilliant woman. And in listening to her, one of the things that struck me was the fact that we have amongst us what I call the walking wounded. The rates of trauma in our nation are tremendous. You know, we just learned from the ACEs study a couple of years ago that the majority of Americans, really and truly, have undergone not one, but even more traumas. And the ACE study focused on childhood traumas. However, we all know that trauma doesn't end in childhood. Many of us continue to experience trauma as adults. Subsequently, many years ago, I started developing this concept of Heartsong. And I wish I could say that it's original, it isn't. It's based on ancient practices. And the recent events in our nation made me aware of the fact that we really need to tap into those ancient therapeutic secrets. I say that this is a transformative process of release from pain and suffering of trauma to attain spiritual awakening and the realization of true happiness, health, and wealth. As you all know, I am not a medical doctor. I'm also not a psychologist or psychiatrist, so there's nothing in this presentation that is intended to replace a one-on-one relationship with a qualified medical professional. This is not intended as any type of medical advice. It is simply a sharing of my knowledge and, more importantly, of my heart, based on research and my own personal experiences, as well as the experiences of various clients that I work with. I encourage you to make your own healthcare decisions based upon your research in partnership with your healthcare professionals, and most importantly, tuning into your heart's wisdom. A little bit about who I am and why I do what I do. I am what I term an integrative wellness mentor, and I'm a trauma experiential alchemist. And I know you're just like, what the heck is that, Michelle? I focus on helping people to look at health from a healing-oriented perspective, taking into account body, mind, heart, and soul, and also emphasizing the need for us to integrate conventional medicine with quote-unquote alternative medicine. When I talk about being a trauma experiential alchemist, it's because during my childhood, I experienced several sexual traumas. Interestingly enough, I did not really recall these incidents until later on in my adult life, when I came to the awareness that there was something dysfunctional occurring in my own relationships with my husband at that point in time. And I didn't know why. I had no idea of why. You know, he was a loving person, and I couldn't understand why I was not able to function optimally in our relationship, particularly during the sexual experience. Because of that, I went to a ritualistic experience where we went away and we did a cleanse, a fast. And this was a fast of all things, not only of food, but also there was no sleep. And there was a lot of integration of what I'm going to refer to as beautiful ancient therapeutic modalities. So there was the use of herbs, taste. There was the use of colors and imagery. There was the use of essential oils. And most importantly, there was the use of what I term therapeutic harmonics. Through that type of experience, I was able to not only access the memories of that traumatic experience, later on, I was taught how to utilize those same tools to be able to transcend that experience, to transform that experience. And that's why I say that I am an alchemist. I enjoy teaching people how to be alchemists, how to change the lead in their lives into gold. I want to encourage us to consider the possibility that trauma is not who we are. That's why I don't say that I'm a survivor. I don't even say that I'm a victor or anything of that nature, because I don't identify myself with the experience that I have had. It is simply an experience that I've had, but it is not who I am. That is the most important lesson that I would like to invite you to consider. Now, before we go any further, I want to talk a little bit more about why conventional approaches fail. The first reason is because trauma is not logical. You know, there's nothing about trauma that quote unquote makes sense. When we ask ourselves, why would we hold on to a wounding experience? It doesn't make sense. The whole notion of self-preservation tells us that we wouldn't want to hold on to something that is continuously wounding us, continuously tearing us apart. It's illogical. And yet, the approaches that we tend to utilize within our conventional sphere are logic-based. You know, we talk to people and we help people to quote unquote rationalize that, yes, this happened to you in the past. And yes, whatever happened to you, it was because that person did such and such. It is not that you are a bad person. Do you see where I'm going with this? All of that is logic. All of that is based on the idea that somehow the trauma and the effect of trauma can be resolved or negated by simply making it make sense and simply assuring somebody of the logic of digging out of that quote unquote trauma wound. The other challenge is that conventional approaches use a direct form of engagement where you're constantly focusing directly on the wound. What we're going to talk about as we proceed today is that when it comes to the emotions, when it comes to the mind, when it comes to the spirit, really and truly, you achieve more through less. When we look at many spiritual texts, we are invited to not deal with quote unquote evil directly, but to focus on the complement, which is the good, the wonderful. And it is that indirect approach that enables us to heal. We can even look at the example of quote unquote cancer within the physical body. The Western approach, for the most part, is one of directly attacking the cancer cells, right? Whereas a more holistic approach can be, well, the cancer cell is over there. Let me focus on the healthy cells. Let me focus on creating a healthy environment. And in a healthy environment, guess what? The wonderful side effect is that the cancer will die of starvation because we're not giving it the attention and the nutrition that it needs. The same is true with traumatic wounds. They create an energetic body. Some of you are old enough to remember the movie Ghostbuster and the interesting, huge marshmallow puff man, right? Fed off of the fear of the community, the constant focus on the community. The more the community focused on the marshmallow puff man, the bigger and bigger and bigger he grew. And indeed, the way in which they were able to overcome the marshmallow puff man was by helping people to break their connection and their fixation on fear, on this energetic being, and to instead focus on something else. So we're going to talk about that. Another reason why these conventional approaches fail is because they're based on a false identity, where we are identifying with the trauma that has occurred. And as I stated before in the very beginning, I want to challenge us to make a separation between a stressor, in this case a traumatic event, and the stress, our response to that event. When we feel that our response to the event is intrinsic, is an absolute based on whatever it is that we're encountering, then we have a false sense of identity, because now we think that we must identify with the wound, as opposed to realizing that we are divine beings that have a wonderful opportunity to exercise our divine right of choice. We can choose to extract ourselves, to separate ourselves from that event, and to tie into our true identity, which is one of a divine being. And last but not least, what we're going to talk about right after this is the fact that conventional approaches fail to take into consideration that you cannot use physical and mental tools for emotional, spiritual wounds. Now, what do I mean by that, you may ask? Well, this ties into something called the amygdala hijack. And you might remember from my first screen that I'm a HeartMath licensed provider, which means that not only do I function as a HeartMath coach and a mentor, I've also been trained in terms of really understanding the science behind why it works. One particular aspect of HeartMath science that I want to share with you is something called the amygdala hijack. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to play a video for you, a short little video.
The amygdala is the body's anxiety switch. In usual day-to-day life, the amygdala is in the off mode. The only times it gets activated is during moments of danger or threat, when an appropriate anxiety response is necessary. However, when this switch is repeatedly activated during moments of stress, sadness, grief, or anger, it may get stuck in the on mode. Once this happens, people start to develop acute phobias, panic attacks, and anxiety disorders. When you get anxious often, the amygdala assumes that this level of anxiety is the new norm. It then adapts and adopts this new level of anxiety as the normal level of anxiety for your body. This is why some people seem anxious all the time. On a conscious level, they may feel it is wrong, and they should not be feeling so anxious. But on the subconscious level, they are unable to change it once it has been set. This process of learning is known as operant conditioning. Scientists have been aware for years that this is the cause of all anxiety disorders, including panic attacks and phobias. Under normal conditions, operant conditioning is used by the brain to acquire new knowledge, like learning to read, drive, or even juggle a few balls. Practicing, repeating, an action or group of actions allows us to learn and master new skills.
The amygdala is a part of the brain that stores our emotional memories. What is very important for us to realize is that when you try to utilize things like quote unquote talk therapy, it makes no sense, because the amygdala hijacks the brain. The amygdala prevents us from being able to access the frontal cortex, for us from being able to access the executive functioning. And that is why conventional approaches to trauma do not work. There's no way that you can talk your way out of an emotional, spiritual trauma, because of this exact mechanism called the amygdala hijack. What happens is that you fall into a loop of patterns, what I call a knee-jerk reaction, an emotional, spiritual knee-jerk reaction, wherein whenever you encounter an environment that is somewhat similar to the initial traumatic event, you have that knee-jerk reaction of responding the same way that you responded in the original event. It's similar to death by a million cuts. Our original trauma is compounded by the fact that we are constantly reliving that trauma. We're constantly looping that particular traumatic energy. The event may not be the same. And in fact, we may never experience another traumatic event similar to the original, but just little triggers in life create that looping within the brain, within the consciousness, that makes us relive that trauma over and over and over again. And as you remember, in those Supreme Court hearings, we are dealing with extremely intelligent people. The woman who testified, an extremely intelligent woman with a PhD in psychology, no less. So we're not talking about someone who doesn't have the ability to process intellectually what has happened. Many of us who go through a traumatic experience, we can intellectually understand that that does not define who we are, that that was an event that happened a long time ago. And yet, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, there's something that keeps us looping over and over and over and over again. This is where the wisdom of our ancestors come in. What I refer to as the science of holy ritual therapy. I want you to take into consideration a holy trinity. And the trinity starts with the mind, which is, in a way of speaking, a masculine energy. See, we talk about willpower. However, we don't really recognize that willpower is not one thing. Willpower is the synergy of two energies coming together. The masculine energy of initiating a decision, otherwise known as the will, and the feminine energy of generating the power through the emotions. In fact, that is the definition of emotions, that which moves you, right? And that is what we are missing many times when we talk about using therapeutic protocols to help to heal a traumatic event. Last but not least, and this is the sweet part, where you integrate the subtle energetics of rhythmic harmonics that soothe, essential aromas that resuscitate, that help to bring things back, colorful visions that inspire, tender touches that trigger, and vulnerary flavors that nourish. The integration of these senses help to catalyze the synergy between the will and the power. This gives us that beautiful trinity. You have the Holy Spirit Mother energy, remember the power, the emotional power, merging with the Heavenly Father, that initiatory will, coming together in that beautiful soup of the sensory simulation and creating a human child of divine origins. This is the secret to healing from trauma. Healing occurs when there is a new birth, when we're able to shed and allow the old to die and give birth to a new you. Interestingly enough, I also say that this is based on a beautiful Chinese concept from the I Ching. The I Ching is a set of 64 hexagrams or 64 lessons, spiritual lessons. And one of those hexagrams talks about the idea of increasing through decrease. In this case, what we are decreasing is the energetic attachment, the focus on that traumatic event. But we're not doing it in a direct manner. We're doing it in a slick manner. And the slick manner is simply this. You have a bank account, an energetic bank account. And the same way that we say to people, let your dollars count, go and buy organic produce instead of buying the other stuff. And the hope is that by doing that, slowly but surely, the other stuff will start to diminish and the organic stuff will start to increase. The same is true here. We experience increase and bounty through our detachment from our fixation with the original event. So when I deal with people who are anchored to trauma, it's not about trying to go in there and figure it out and to dig deep and all that kind of stuff. We're going to increase and give birth to a new us by focusing on something completely different. And it is this process of separating that gives the catalyst for increase, similar to, say, the atomic bomb. That energy that is released from the separation within the atom, that is what we're talking about. I ask you the question, do you dare at this point in time to believe, conceive, and achieve with me for a couple of minutes tonight? I'm going to take that as a yes. The first step is daring to believe. In the words of Marion Williamson, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us. For those of us who have experienced trauma, I am challenging you to believe, to be courageous enough to believe that it is not our fear. It is this concept that, do I dare to be something more than my trauma? What would it mean if I'm really and truly a divine person? We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? Because you are a divine child of God. Again, dare to believe that you are a divine being. Remember, I said that one of the reasons why conventional therapies do not work is because they're based on a false premise, based on a premise that we are just simply human beings. And I'm challenging you tonight to think that you are not simply a human being. You are a divine being having a human experience. And that trauma that has occurred is one of the human experiences that you have encountered. And indeed, your playing small does not serve the world. For you to think that you are merely a human being does not serve anyone. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people don't feel insecure around you. I know you may say, but who am I? I can't go around thinking that I'm a divine person, that I'm a god or a goddess. Oh, we can't say that. Blasphemy. Ah, but aren't we? We are all meant to shine. Children shine. Children don't think of themselves as being limited. And somehow through the process of trauma, we have started to associate ourselves with this false concept of limitation. but we were born to make manifest the glory of that divine entity that we are. So if you will believe with me, if you will allow yourself to let your own light shine, and by doing so, we are going to not only heal ourselves, but we are also going to unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. Because as we are liberated from our own trauma, as we are liberated from our own fear, our presence of being and stepping into our divinity will automatically liberate others.